My name is Walter Murphy and I'm 64 years old. I live alone in a small gatehouse at the entrance to St. Michael's Cemetery. This place in our town is called the Old Place, though it's only about 100 years old. The first settlers were buried here, then soldiers, then ordinary townspeople. Now burials are rare, the cemetery is almost closed, only occasionally accepting those with family plots. My job is simple. Open the gates in the morning, close them in the evening, maintain order, sweep the paths, mow the grass in the summer and shovel snow in the winter. I like the silence. I love these old stones, their names, the dates that hold lives. Sometimes I talk to them. It's probably silly, but over 20 years they've become my neighbors. That day, everything began as usual. I woke up at 6, made coffee and went out onto the porch. This year's winter had been snowy, but yesterday's blizzard had died down and the sky had cleared. I put on my sheepskin jacket, grabbed a shovel and went to clear the paths to the main alley. The sun was just rising and the shadows from the crosses lay long and blue. The air was cold and piercing, but I was used to it. About 2 hours later, I reached the far plot where someone had recently been buried. It was a fresh grave. She had been buried the day before yesterday. The funeral was that of a young woman of about 30. I think she had committed suicide. I remembered the coffin being lowered into the ground, the relatives weeping. Now the mound of earth was smooth and neat, wreaths lay on the snow. Towards evening it began to snow. Large flakes fell from the sky, covering everything. I closed the gate early, lit the stove in the gatehouse and sat down to dinner. The wind howled outside, but the house was warm and cozy. I turned on the old TV, watched the news and then went to bed around 10. I woke up to silence. The clock showed 3 in the morning. The snow had stopped, the moon was shining outside, and in its light everything was almost as clear as day. I was about to roll over when I suddenly heard a sound. A soft, scraping sound, like someone was scratching the ground. I sat up and listened. Silence. Then again. Closer now. And the footsteps. Small light in the snow. I stood up, went to the window and looked out. First I saw nothing. Just a white field crosses trees. Then I noticed movement. Near a fresh grave. Something was scurrying. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it might be a dog or a fox. But it was too big to be a fox. I got dressed, grabbed a flashlight and went out onto the porch. The cold hit my face, the snow crunched under my feet. I approached the far end, trying to tread quietly. The moon was shining brightly and I turned off the flashlight so as not to scare the animal. As I approached, I froze. The grave had been dug. Piles of earth lay around it and a black hole gaped in the center. I walked closer, turned on the flashlight and shone it inside. The coffin was open. My heart sank. I stepped back and suddenly noticed footprints in the snow. Small, bare children's feet. They walked from the grave deeper into the cemetery, toward the old section where children from the orphanage who died of the Spanish flu 100 years ago are buried. I looked at these footprints and couldn't move. One thought nagged at me: this couldn't be true. A woman's body couldn't have gotten up and walked away. And it certainly couldn't have left children's footprints. But the footprints were there. Real, clear on fresh snow. And they beckoned me to follow them. I stood over the dug grave and looked at the tiny footprints leading off into the darkness. The wind died down and the silence became so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. Somewhere in the distance, the hoot of an owl shook me from my stupor. I knew I had to call the police. I had to go back to the guardhouse, call the sheriff and tell them about the dug grave. But the footprints, they beckoned. A small, barefoot figure emerged from the empty coffin and headed toward the old children's graves. It was incredible, but I had seen that empty coffin with my own eyes. The woman buried the day before yesterday was no more. And in her place were children. I followed the footprints. Then another. The snow crunched beneath my boots, but the children's tracks were completely silent, just tiny depressions stretching forward. I walked, shining my flashlight, trying to make out something at the end of that line. The moon disappeared behind a cloud and darkness fell. The path led between old tombstones, past leaning crosses, past marble angels with broken wings. I knew this place like the back of my hand, but now it seemed alien. The trees stood too close, the shadows shifting even though there was no wind. I stopped and listened. Silence. Even the owl fell silent. And then I heard laughter. Childish, shrill like the ringing of a bell. It came from where the tracks led. I turned off the flashlight so as not to give myself away and followed the sound. The laughter came again, this time closer. And suddenly I saw them. In a gap between the trees, in an old clearing where a ruined chapel had once stood, white figures shimmered. They ran circling as if playing tag. 5, maybe 6 children in long shirts, barefoot in the snow. No tracks remained. Only the first ones had been brought here from the grave. I froze behind the thick trunk of an oak tree and watched. The moon rose again and I saw their faces. They had no faces. Smooth white skin where eyes, noses and mouths should have been. Only ovals turned in my direction. They knew I was here. They sensed me. One of them, the smallest, separated from the circle and walked toward me. He walked slowly, barefoot in the snow, leaving no tracks. He stopped 3 meters from me and turned his impassive face. Did I hear breathing? Or was it the wind? Where a mouth should have been, a voice came. Thin, plaintive like a lost child's. Uncle, we're cold. Can we go to the guardhouse? Let's be quiet. A shiver ran through me. I wanted to answer, but my tongue caught in my throat. The figure took another step. It extended its hand. A small white hand with unnaturally long fingers. We want to go home. We've been forgotten here. No one comes. No one remembers. And you come every day. You're kind. Will you let us in? I remembered. The children from the orphanage who died of the Spanish flu in 1918. They were buried behind the church, without names, without crosses, just a pit and a mass grave. Then the church was torn down, the cemetery expanded, and the children's bones remained underground, without headstones. Only old archival records which I read out of boredom on long winter evenings. I took a step back, then another. The boy's hand dropped, his empty face tilted to the side. Don't go. Play with us. We're bored alone. There was a rustling sound behind me. I turned around. The other children formed a semicircle around me, blocking my way back. They stood motionless, like statues, their faces blank. I was trapped. I stood in a circle of faceless children and felt the cold seep beneath my sheepskin coat. Not the cold of the frost, but another, inner chill that numbs your fingers and takes your breath away. The tiny figures didn't move, only their empty faces turned toward me, and I knew they saw me better than I saw them. The smallest, the one who approached first, spoke again. The voice seemed to come from nowhere, echoing in my head. Don't be afraid, Uncle. We're not evil. We're just frozen. We've been lying in the cold ground for 100 years, without names, without crosses, without candles. No one remembers us. No one brings flowers. But you come. You talk to us. You see us. I remembered. Sometimes, passing by the place where the church used to be, I'd stop and look at the empty clearing. Seemed like someone was there. I even said out loud, "Hi guys. How are you?" Just like that, out of loneliness. I didn't believe they could hear. But they did. We were waiting, the voice continued. Waiting for you to call. And you called. Now you're ours. You'll play with us. You'll keep us warm. You'll be our daddy. I stepped back, but my back hit a tree. My hands were shaking and one thought was spinning in my head. Run. But where? The circle was slowly, inexorably narrowing. I felt their presence on my skin like an icy breath. I can't, I managed to squeeze out. I'm old. I'm going to die soon. And you have to go. Find the light. Somewhere warm. The little heads tilted to the side as if considering my words. Then the tallest of them, a little older, maybe 10, stepped forward. His empty face was very close. I saw smooth skin stretched taut where eyes should be, and suddenly outlines appeared. Barely discernible, like a pattern on fogged glass. Nose, lips, eyelids. They appeared and disappeared. We don't know the way, he whispered. No one taught us. We died little. We only know how to play. Will you teach us? The second, smaller one, tugged at the hem of my sheepskin jacket. His fingers were cold as ice, but they left a burning sensation in the fabric. "Uncle, is your house warm? Is the stove burning? You want to warm up? We won't misbehave. We will be quiet." I imagined leading them to the guardhouse. How they would sit on the floor, take off their wet shirts, and hold their hands out to the fire. And then, what then? They would stay forever. They'll sit in the corners, watching with empty faces, waiting for me to fall asleep. I've read stories like that. Souls that can't leave, clinging to life, sucking warmth, life years from themselves. "No," I said firmly. "You can't. You're not alive. You need to go somewhere else. I don't know where, but not to me." The empty faces froze. Silence hung in the air. And then the smallest of them began to cry. A thin, pitiful cry like that of an abandoned kitten. He covered his face with his hands, and through his fingers I saw tears streaming down his smooth skin. Black, thick like tar. "You don't want us," he sobbed. "You're just like everyone else. You promised, but you don't want it." The others stirred. Their hands reached out to me, cold fingers touching my face, neck, chest. I felt the warmth leave my body, my legs giving way, my vision darkening. They were consuming me, slowly but inexorably. I fell to my knees. The snow beneath me was melting from the heat, but I was cold, so cold. Somewhere in the distance, beyond this circle, a light flickered. The lantern I'd dropped was still burning, lying in the snow. A dim beam of light fell on an old tree, and I saw a cross carved into the bark. An ancient one, almost faded, but still a cross. I crawled toward it. The children clung to my clothes, pulling me back, but I crawled, digging my nails into the snow. Another meter, another. My hand touched the trunk. I hugged the tree, pressed my cheek to the bark, to this old cross, and whispered a prayer. The only one I remembered from childhood. "Our Father, who art in heaven." The children screamed. The cry was inhuman, piercing, full of pain and rage. They recoiled, their figures shimmering, becoming translucent. I whispered without ceasing, feeling the strength returning to my body. "Hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come." The wind lifted the snow, creating a white shroud. Through it, I saw the children melting, disappearing, dissolving into thin air. Only the smallest one, the one who was crying, stood there the longest. He looked at me with a blank expression, and at the last moment his eyes appeared. Enormous, black, full of tears. "You'll regret it," he whispered. "We'll come back. We always come back." And he disappeared. I sat under a tree, pressed against an old cross, unable to move. My heart was pounding in my throat, my hands were shaking, and the black eyes of the disappearing child were still before my eyes. "We'll come back." Those words pierced my brain like a splinter. I don't know how long I sat like that. Finally, I forced myself to stand. My legs wouldn't obey me, so I leaned against a tree. I picked up the flashlight and shone it around. The clearing was empty, only my footprints and the dent where I'd lain. I walked back, trying not to look back. The child's footprints leading away from the fresh grave had disappeared. The snow around me was clean, untouched, as if nothing had happened. Only the dug grave remained, a black hole in the white blanket. I skirted it and practically ran toward the guardhouse. At home, I locked the door, lit the stove, and sat by the fire until morning. My mind was racing with thoughts, each more terrifying than the last. Who are they? What do they want? And most importantly, will they come back? In the morning, I called the sheriff. The police arrived, took photos, and asked questions. I told them about the dug-up grave, but said nothing about the children. Who would believe me? They'd say the old man had gone crazy. They examined everything, scratched their heads, and left, promising to find the vandals. An hour later, a crew of workers arrived, filled in the grave, and packed down the snow. The day passed quietly. I walked around the cemetery, checking the other graves. Everything was in its place. Only in the old section where the children had stood yesterday did I notice something strange. The snow lay flat, but in the center of the clearing, right where they had been circling, a patch of thawed snow had formed. It seemed as if the earth was breathing warmth from within. I walked closer. An old, nearly collapsed slab peeked out from under the snow. The letters were barely legible. "Here lie the children of St. Anne's Orphanage." buried in the summer of 1918. No one is forgotten. I scooped up some snow with my hand. The slab was old and cracked, but clearly installed recently, maybe 20 years ago. Someone still remembered them. But they themselves didn't know it. Or maybe they knew but didn't believe it. That evening, I went to church to see Father Thomas, the young priest who had served with us for the last 5 years. I told him everything. Frankly, about the children, about prayer, about their promise to return. He listened silently, then crossed himself and said, "Walter, these aren't vandals. These are the souls of unbaptized infants. They can't go to heaven or hell, so they languish between worlds. Sometimes they come to the living, seeking warmth and care. But if you accept them, they'll never leave. You did the right thing by not letting them in. But now they'll come every night. Until they take you away." My heart sank. "What should we do?" I asked. Father Thomas thought for a moment and said we should hold a memorial service right here, erect a cross, bless the ground, and pray. Pray a lot. We agreed that the following evening at sunset he would come to the cemetery. I promised to prepare everything. I spent the night awake holding my rosary beads. I listened to every rustle, every breath of wind. But it was quiet. The wall clock only ticked, counting down the minutes until dawn. In the morning, I took a shovel and went to the clearing. I cleared the snow around the stove and placed a small wooden cross I made from old boards. Then I brought flowers. Artificial ones, the only ones I could find that winter. I stood there in silence. And suddenly I felt someone standing behind me. I turned around. No one. Just snow and trees. But in the snow, right in front of the cross, lay a small toy. An old, faded plush bunny. It hadn't been there a minute ago. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. And then I heard a barely audible whisper like the wind. "Thank you, Uncle." That evening, as arranged, Father Thomas arrived. He brought a censer, holy water, and a thick old book in a tattered leather binding. Together we walked to the clearing. The sun was already setting, and the shadows from the trees reached out to us like long fingers. Father Thomas stopped by the stove, crossed himself, and began reciting prayers in Latin. I stood nearby, holding a lit candle, and watched the smoke from the censer rise into the sky. It was cold, but I didn't feel the cold. Only a strange warmth in my chest, as if someone were warming me from within. When the priest finished and sprinkled the ground with holy water, I noticed the snow around the stove began to melt. Quickly, right before my eyes, a round patch of thawed ground formed, and the first snowdrops appeared from under the snow. Living green in the middle of winter. Father Thomas looked at me and said, "They have accepted. Now they will go." We stood there for a while, then gathered our things and headed back. At the cemetery gate, I turned around. I thought I saw small figures standing in the clearing near the tombstone. They didn't move, just watching us go. Then one of them waved at me. I didn't say anything to Father Thomas. I simply nodded and entered the gatehouse. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in many days. No dreams, no nightmares. In the morning, I woke to the bright sun streaming through the window. I stepped out onto the porch and gasped. The entire cemetery was strewn with flowers. Not artificial ones, but real ones, blooming right in the snow. White, yellow, blue, they grew on every grave, on every path, even on the roof of the gatehouse. I walked to the clearing. The flowers stood there like a wall, covering the tombstone. And as I got closer, I saw a new inscription on the slab. It read, "Sleep peacefully, children. You are remembered." I don't know who did it. Maybe Father Thomas, maybe someone from the town, or maybe they themselves. But since that day, the old cemetery has become quiet and peaceful. I continue to work as a caretaker, walking around the graves every morning, talking with those buried here. Sometimes I think I hear a quiet laugh in response. But now it's a kind laughter, like the laughter of children playing in a distant, warm garden. A year has passed. Flowers in the cemetery bloom year-round, even in winter. People come to see this miracle, bringing new toys to the grave. And every evening I leave a bowl of warm milk on the porch. In the morning it's always empty. And sometimes, waking up in the middle of the night, I see little silhouettes in the window. They stand by the stove holding hands and looking at the moon. and then they disappear until the next night. I know they haven't disappeared completely. They've simply found peace. And I'm glad I helped them with that. Even if the price was my sleepless nights and the eternal cold and my fingers lingering from that meeting. Yesterday I found another gift on the porch. An old, faded plush bunny, exactly like the one that lay in the snow a year ago. Only now it has eyes. 2 black beads look at me with gratitude. I put it on the shelf next to the icon. And made some tea. It was snowing outside, but the guardhouse was warm and cozy. I knew they would come again tonight. But I'm not afraid anymore. They're my children. Every single one of them.